let's put the sexual tension aside and have just the stats, ma'am. This is a brand new segment here for the Gumbocast where Jessica Brand and myself will be talking about various trivia minutia when it comes to numbers, facts, figures, anything that we can break down and do well with in regards of win-loss and how to figure out games for Price is Right or all around the game show world. We wanted to start off this one with something that has been sticking in our craws for the past few weeks. Ever since the loss of James Holzhauer's run on Jeopardy, let's talk about Final Jeopardy wagering. Especially, and we're going to use James Holzhauer's loss as the prime example as to he did the absolute right thing strategy-wise.
Yes. And
just break it down.
So few players wager correctly. We didn't see it in the teen tournament correctly. We almost never see it correctly. But James was exactly correct in how to do this. The scores going into Final Jeopardy are Emma at 26,600, James at 23,400, and Jay at 11,000 even. So James's best wager is $13.99, which is what he did. So why that's important is because that's as much as he can put up against Emma without being taken over by a double on the part of Jay. So James, in this sense, is protecting against the fact that if Emma misses and if he misses, but Jay somehow gets it correct, he wins. Because Jay can only go to 22,000, he's one of going to the wager that puts him at 22,001. And because Emma is probably going to try to go 20,201 to cover James, if she misses, she's out. If James even hits, then he can't win because, the most he's going to get is 22,000. So he's counting on Emma on a subject that she's very familiar with because she did a lot on Shakespeare historically.
Yep.
But all that has to happen is that she misses. It doesn't matter what James does in this instance because of the size of the wager and what it is relatively to Jay. Jay is out at this point regardless with the wager of $13.99. That's incredible to see that. I know there were some stories about Holzhauer that I had heard that he spent anywhere from 30 to 40 hours alone on ringing in on a signaling device, which again, that's not really practiced a whole lot by people. I'm talking about strategies that were appropriate. And yes, of course, he did essentially shout-outs with his wagering, but they were also very sound wagering to try to do what his score was relative to the opponent's score. I draw a parallel to Wheel of Fortune when you're picking bonus round letters. You have all the time in the world when you can do that. You can spend all the time you want when you're deciding your Jeopardy wager, too. And if you want to calculate the expected weighted value of those clues that are remaining, that's not terribly hard to do. But James was able to do it pretty easily exactly what should be done. I'm amazed more people don't study this. It's information that is easily and readily available on Andy Saunders' J Archive. Absolutely incredible work what he and Robert do on there. But that's the right thing to do. You want to wager a little, because if you go above that, then you could tie Jay. There's no guarantee you beat him on the buzzer in a tiebreaker. And because they're not going to catch Emma, you're stuck in the middle. So you count on one player missing, which is probably your best odds, rather than two missing. So why not? There's no downside to that.
I think it's something that people have forgotten. Or maybe they don't remember or don't recall that when it comes to regular games now, there are tiebreakers. Because before the regular season adopted tiebreakers, I believe in 2016? The 2016 season with the first tiebreaker?
Yeah, he would have wagered 1,400 if they didn't exist, because there's no disincentive to him having a player back at that point. Because it doesn't matter who James plays theoretically in the next game, he can just play his own game and not worry about that. But given only one player from each show at most, because 0-0-0 happened twice, can happen, he's going to put himself at the most advantageous position to do so.
Right. It's also happened in tournaments.
Yeah,
for
definitely.
qualifying rounds. I
We had
remember.
a tiebreak. We had a tiebreak clue this past week, so which should
Yeah.
never be happening. There's no reason, realistically, short of Final Jeopardy scores being tied, that you should be doing that. I mean, really, why? I mean, honestly, at that point, players should be adjusting to what their category strengths are. It's kind of prisoner's dilemma at that point. I understand that. But if your scores aren't tied, why are you playing for the tie? Why? Like you're $1 less or more, and trust yourself, or don't if you think it's something your opponent is terrible at. But consider strategy beyond tying. I don't understand this. Why this is happening still? Tiebreakers are fun to watch, but they're not fun to watch from executing proper strategy. If you're going to get on Jeopardy, as I want to do, study your strategy. No Betteridge's Law, like second player betting big sometimes. No multiple choice. No, all the terms that are in the J archive that can make you such a better player. And considering all the situations that you might find yourself in, good wagering makes close games winnable for players that otherwise wouldn't win more often than they should
Hmm.
because people don't know how to do it. It's remarkable. For a show that bills itself as the smart show, and I would argue right now it is, even though I find it's decreasingly so in its difficulty, the people that can memorize enough stuff don't take the time to memorize a few more facts that can make the difference in what we're scoring here. I guess that's confounding to me, and the fact that people aren't being aggressive enough on daily doubles. James has introduced that concept into game theory, and James has also introduced the concept that the lights may affect you, or maybe they won't. That's not to say discount the lights, but it's not to say that the lights are guaranteed to be a factor, because he treated the money as not assured before it was won, and I actually employed a similar strategy in one of my own games elsewhere in the world, but that's how I view it, because you have to be willing to take that risk for what the reward is relatively. And people still don't do it. It's almost as if this run didn't exist in that specific respect. I I don't I don't get it. Like, I mean, I understand not everyone's going to know the strategies, but if you're going to be on the show, you're someone who is obviously almost always qualified to be on the show. Learn a little bit of math. It won't hurt you. There's a free calculator that lets you literally put things in and determine what you should do. Why not use it? I mean, if we're going to learn the quadratic formula, which I think is more complicated than Jeopardy, in your little high school math class, you can learn proper wagering. Come on, people.
Or logarithms for that matter.
Yeah.
I would.
I mean, I did hedge funding. That's a lot more complicated than this. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
Black-Scholes option pricing model. Look that up, kids.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, I will say this in regards to the Wednesday game, the Wednesday semifinals, because we use that clip for game show Gumbo. Um, from my perspective, the two teams who played to that tie, well, it was you had a third place contestant who was so far back, where his only hope is both the tied players bet it all and lose. But that didn't happen. But there's another aspect that I want to bring into this, and that's tournament wagering for final. Because you're playing with a different set of rules than you are to a regular game of Jeopardy. Because not
You are.
only because you have the five winners, but you also have the four wild card spots. And
Yeah.
going back through, I was looking at the J archive for because a friend of mine had a contestant who won a college championship years ago. So I was looking at the wagering of finals and who qualified where. And it seemed like if you have a score at 20,000 nowadays, 20,000 is usually the baseline that's good enough to get you in the semis. So
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I
you
guess that makes sense. Yeah.
Right, because remember you have the 4 wildcard spots
You're
for
right. I was
with
thinking
the
about those too as I was saying that because I was running some numbers in my head as you were saying that, but the average show on Jeopardy because they were bringing this up during James's run actually what the average show pays, including the two players who don't win. The average show pays about I think it was 17 or 18,000. So if we subtract 3,000 from that, we're going to get about 14,000 as a baseline. But you always want to go a little more aggressive than that because of the nature of the tournament, and some people might think that. So if you're going to stay a little step ahead, you're probably going to go with 19 or 20. I think probably the baseline figure for what you're talking about is if you really want to get what the break even point is expected to be at least, it's probably a little bit lower than what you're saying. But I think it's a good enough cold and hard fast rule to use as what you should aim for. I like it.
at least get to 20 for the total for the day, where if you don't win, you're pretty much guaranteed a spot in the wild card. You could take a look at the figures from last year's Tournament of Champions, where you want to know what the average non-winning score was that got you
Well,
into the wild card, that got you the wild card spot.
sure.
It was between 16 and 17,000.
Okay. So what that tells me about behavior from contestants, or at least ones who are in the tournaments, if that's the average, then people are catching on to the fact that you need to wager a little bit more because, you're going to have to win a little more than an average show. And of course, you're dealing with players who are better than the average player in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think you should be a little bit more aggressive than that because I maintain that you should play very aggressively on trivia games and apps and all of this bullshit. But if you're doing that, you're guaranteeing yourself. Like I lean towards Marcian wagering rather than Venetian. If you really want to go into the Jeopardy terms of it, but if you're being more aggressive, yeah, it has more downside. But I mean, if you didn't get it anyway, you probably weren't going to get a spot regardless. So, given tournament play, how you need to advance with wagering, you need to bear more and be more aggressive than what your opponents are expecting, because we're talking about an average. And I'm curious where our bell curve is a center point and what the standard deviations are, because I'm wondering if 3,000 is like basically SD1. I would try to go with whatever SD2 is. So if your base is 68.8 and SD1, shoot, well, SD2 is 99.44. I remember SD3 is 99.6. SD1 is 86.4, I think it is. I'm going to verify that. Uh, it's standard deviation. I should know these off the top of my head. Um, Okay, so yeah, okay, it's 34.1, 34.1, 13.6, 2.1. Okay. Actually, so I overestimated the. Oh, wait, no, I didn't. It's okay. So 13.6 and 68.2. 68.2 and 13.6 would be your answer there. So 68 and 13 is 31, and then, yeah, 81.7. So what I want to do there is I want to give 81.7. And then I want to do, okay, so I want to do 31.7 more the average play. So I want to do 31.7 times 14,000, which I believe is the average. So it's 14,300, I think, if I want to be precise here. So 14,300 times 1.31 is 18,733. That's the target score I want to play for. And as you mentioned, the target score of these average folks is somewhere between SD0 right hand side to SD1. So if we're going on the full standard deviation above, we've ensured about a 25% chance better winning just by adding a few thousand more to our wagers. And that's overall. That's not even in Final Jeopardy. That's about considering any daily doubles we have. If we consider there are 4 wagers and an average player gets 1.33 of them, the difference between that is going to be, if you give me a second here. All right, so we're going to do that minus 14,000, and we're considering 1.33 divided the players. So we're talking about adding $3,559 to an average expected wager, be that in and that's in total of expected clues. So I mean, we eventually want our wagers to be 35.59 divided by whatever number of daily doubles plus Final Jeopardies we get, and we know it's at least one. Actually, that should be divided by 1.2, 3/4. But the point stands. We're going to wager about 1,000 more if we get every single wager, and then we adjust accordingly to that. So 3,600 is our baseline to what we're going to add to. Essentially, if we're talking about increasing our wagers to essentially be a step ahead of the opposition, but not going too far because we don't want to wind up risking ourselves if it's a category we don't really know. But that little bit more of aggression hasn't been touched upon by Jeopardy players en masse yet. That's an opportunity that I would look for. I wouldn't expect to see, but it would be interesting to see if someone executed it. James is not on that end. James is on those little bitty tails that you're going to expect to see on maybe on Haley's comment on that 0.1, on that 3 sigma, essentially, that 0.1%.
Well, you may be seeing a lot more active wagering when we get to the new season that's coming out in September, because the season had already wrapped by the end of the teen tournament.
Yeah, well, what I'm curious about is we're at the point where people are going to start to see the first few days of James's run. So I mean, we're going to find out sooner than later if there's anything to this. I'm talking specifically tournament play here, and I believe tournament play reflections of wagers are more apt to being appropriate on the more conservative side, actually, in terms of winning in regular gameplay. So let's say we have base wager. Base wager is number one. And we have base wager 1.5. That is the aggression that's required to win an average game, assuming a normal distribution of daily double finding. In tournament play, 1.5 is the default, so we need to ultimately go to number two in terms of standard deviations of expected wagers. So basically, players are, what a shock, they're not being aggressive enough. The math even supports that as a fact because of the number you gave of expected wild cards. That's
Right, of
astonishing.
20,000.
Yeah. 20, actually, no, that might be a little bit high. No, that's right. That's actually a little bit high, but it's not by much. We know it's like 18,886 from what I was saying. So to be 1,400 off divided by the expected 1.33 is going to be, a sec here, folks. I have to calculate this really fast. It doesn't take long, but it does take not immediate time. So about 1,000 more. So we're talking about 1,000 more on an expected wager opportunity, which again is a daily double in either round or a Final Jeopardy. That's how close this number was. $1,053 off that she gave.
Wow.
It's close.
Right, and I was just doing an eyeball test and saying, okay, if you add up the total amount that's on the board without using daily doubles yet, it's 45,000, 15,000 in regular Jeopardy, 30,000 Final Jeopardy.
Yeah,
45,000. So if you get more than a third of that, just on base, which would be about 20,000, because we're also dealing with teenagers who, just speaking for first round tournament play, your main goal is to at least get to the semis. So I think you and I can agree that when it comes to daily double wagering, it's okay to play a little bit safe, because you'll want to do the big bet for final. If you're around 15, 16,000, you do half wager to at least get you to 24.
I think it depends relatively to where you are to scores too. I mean, ultimately, in the average game, because remember, the numbers I'm saying here are for strictly an average game because we're talking about what we would expect to see of typical behavior of a contestant.
Right.
But we have to adjust for that depending on the game necessarily, and that's something James did very well because I mean, as much as he was dominating, that actually made it a little bit easier, more realistically.
Yeah.
Because there was really not much math to calculate. Okay, what's the most they're going to get from the remaining clues relative to me minus my difference? That's what he did essentially in his head, which sounds impressive, and I guess it is, but it's not really that difficult.
But sadly for him, it didn't work for the World Series of Poker.
Yeah, I mean that's just the thing, though. I mean, there are obviously some examples because we're talking standard deviations and their sigmas about let's see, 13.6 off. That would be so around, we would expect in a normal distribution, this strategy did not work about 17% of the time, but of an average player. And we can adjust for that. We're talking about, again, a baseline that we can adjust accordingly. And given how the teen tournament, let's be honest, I love the Jeopardy clue writers. They work hard, they do a great job. These leaned very easy, and not talking about my experience here, but how the teens did. There's when you're talking about games that are buzzer races and daily doubles are limited in scarcity essentially, then you need to wager more, and that reflects that. Because think about what James did. If you're a great player relative to the board that you see, so let's take James as an example here because he routinely did this. You're going to wager more on the daily doubles because you have greater confidence in your ability to get them right.
Right. And you're also got to remember how James Holzhauer did the board. Normal players would go bottom to top to bottom, or if you're playing the Chuck Forrest strategy, which we saw a little bit more after Arthur Chu became champion, he just bounced around the lower half of the board trying to find the daily double, get it out of play.
Yeah, the brand mark has always been a very mix of those two strategies, even before James made them popular, but after Arthur Chu did. So the brand mark is you start at the heat map. The heat map refers to where you're most likely to find the daily doubles, because daily doubles are the scarcest quantities of anything on the board, because they allow you to put in what your wager is. So historically, and James recognized this as well, and he didn't do this truly to the brand mark, but he was very similar in some respects. So the daily doubles historically are going to be 1,200 or 16 clues rather than 2,000. Historically, they can obviously be in the 2,000 as much as they can be in the 400. I'm much more likely about 5 to 1 to be in the 2,000 to 400. But we're going to start mid in double Jeopardy. In single Jeopardy, we do start bottom up because James correctly, astutely noted that they're most likely to be in the $1,000 spot. So what
Yeah.
we do is we start at 16, 16, 16, 16, 16, 12, 12, 12, and then we bounce it around, kind of like it's a whirling snake, essentially around the board. It's almost a bounce, but I call it more like a snake because we're staying on a consistent line until we hit that point.
All right. Sounds good to me. And we will talk more about Jeopardy strategy and other strategies and stats.
Watch for me on TV.
Yep. And that, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between, is your stat lecture for this episode of Gumbocast.